Hey everyone, welcome to the Obvious Podcast, episode number 32. My name is Sonny. I'm the COO at ABC Florida East Coast.
And my name is Peter Daiga. I'm the president and CEO of Associated Builders and Contractors, Florida East Coast chapter.
The Obvious Podcast is a production of ABC Florida East Coast. Unless otherwise stated, all content reflects the opinions of the guests and the host, which is us.
And if you like the Obvious Podcast, you can subscribe on all the major podcast platforms or watch the audio-visual version on YouTube. You can also follow the Obvious Podcast on Instagram, X, and True Social. You can always reach out to us via email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Links to all the social media feeds are in this episode's show notes. And if you want to help others find the podcast, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice.
Well, welcome back, Peter. Last time you and I chatted, you were in Costa Rica.
Yes,
right?
And
how did that go?
Went great. I tell people it doesn't matter, whether I'm replacing big appliances or it's raining all the time. It doesn't matter the circumstances.
Right.
I always enjoyed my time there somehow. I guess that's why I
beautiful
have a
country
place there. But yeah, and I feel rejuvenated, and I'm glad to be back.
Excellent. Welcome back. So. How does it feel to come back to such a slow news week?
Yeah. It's funny because I think I've told you when I'm there, I don't even watch TV.
Yeah.
So I can get really detached, I guess. From
no wonder you're rejuvenated.
Yeah, it really does help. But anyway, at least it's, again, we've talked about this in the past. I'm sleeping a lot better. I know that the country is being run by adults, and people are level-headed thinkers, not detached from reality of the world. And for me, and I'd love to convey this to the left, which is off the rails, but they could live a more peaceful life if they just, right, we talked about this a little bit in the past, slow down, because sometimes you're complaining about something and before the sun sets, it's resolved. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yep. So today's topic, I saw you post something on social media where it was a meme and it said, last week everybody was an expert on blah, blah, blah. And this week, everybody's an expert on international trade and tariffs.
Yes, isn't that the truth?
Yes. So today, I wanted to talk to you about tariffs. And because it's been all over the news, the markets have plummeted. People are freaking out. My 401k is down. I heard Chuck Schumer, which is fascinating to me because the Democrats have loved tariffs for a long time, say the cost of everything will go up. And you're like, no, the cost of everything that isn't American made will go up, right?
Correct.
Assuming they even get implemented. There's all this talk about
it. And that's even assuming it, doesn't pan out the way I think the president plans it panning out, which, by the way, I understand, I think within 24 hours or 48, he had calls from 50 different countries asking to negotiate down their tariffs.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Vietnam went to zero, I heard.
A lot are proposing doing away with it completely.
Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating. So let's put aside the negotiating aspect of it all, that this is just a negotiations. What I really wanted to talk about was the sort of what globalization has done to the American middle class, which used to be something that Democrats talked about all the time. And like now, it's nowhere on their radar. Yeah. Which is fascinating to me, right?
Yeah, but what is on their radar, and we talked about this a little bit before we started taping, back to how this president, which just brings a real smile to my face and a chuckle, he has figured out a way to create, well, he's not really creating them, but embracing issues that are 90-10 issues in this country, maybe 80-20, but and he's done it again. Mm-hmm. I mean, he has got the left defending Wall Street. I can't believe it.
And he's got union guys from Michigan talking about how great his tariffs are.
Exactly. Even some Democrats, I think I had heard. There were a couple of Democrats.
Somebody from Maine, I believe, supported his.
I mean, there's been issues in the past, by the way, which I find funny, where, if they peel off one or two Republicans, the media loves to call it bipartisan. Yeah. Right? I mean, I think they did that on a few, but,
They did?
But you'll never hear that come out of them on this. You peel off a couple Democrats and, if they were true to form, they would be like, look at how bipartisan this issue is that the president's got. But they won't do that.
And, we're all familiar with sort of globalization and outsourcing and how that's impacted the Midwest and the Rust Belt and the Sun Belt, and how really since the 50s, I think 1953 was sort of the peak of American manufacturing, and it has just been downhill since then. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today with you was that the fact that I've been reading about this since 2015. I read an article, and I don't remember, it was the Journal or the New York Times or something. A study had come out from these two academics, last name Deaton and Case, Deaton and Case. And they basically talked about how non-college educated white males had the shortest lifespan in this country. Really surprised me, shocked me, right? Because you hear about all sort of the
Well, it's very interesting,
systematic,
but what they miss is we just don't care about white males anymore. Right. It doesn't really matter if
they have the shortest lifespan in the
shortest
country,
lifespan,
right?
and that their families have been decimated, or they're not even creating families anymore because they see no hope.
They see no hope, exactly. And so and they followed up to that study. The study originally appeared in 2015. They followed it up in 2017. Now they put it into a book, and the data has not changed much. There's a 12-year delta between the lifespan of a non-college educated white male and a college-educated white male, and that has nothing to do with college itself. And they kind of talk about the and I think the 2017 study is called Mortality and Morbidity, and they talk about the fact that economic despair, and it's a term they use, economic despair combined with social isolation has led to all these issues, and it's alcoholism, and which has caused all these health problems, drug use, which has caused all these health problems, and the opioid issue. All of that sort of came together and destroyed, hollowed out really the American middle class. And so I wanted to just kind of touch on the fact that
there's a
price to pay.
Sure, I think that's a great subject, and we could spend hours really talking about the price to pay. I think. There's a subset of data even, which I think you've probably seen in the last few years, about how used to be, I think, a very evenly mixed between the sexes of who was going to traditional college.
Yes.
And that's been changing, I think, in the last 10 or 20 years, or I don't know how long.
Yeah.
So it's not only are the non-college white males socially disconnected and isolated, but we're creating more of them. They're less inclined to actually go to college, or fewer of them are going and or being accepted, right? And we joke too also about this epidemic, if you will, of a lot of single men and their addiction to computer gaming and
pornography and
just disconnected, pull away from society and culture, and some attention is starting to be paid to it.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, what you're talking about. The cost to our society of globalization and how things have changed, and why this president is trying to address that.
Right. I read an article, and it was very, like most articles I read, it was clearly from a liberal perspective. It was an angry journalist.
To start worrying about you? No, actually, if you just read, most of what you read is going to be that way.
Yeah,
you have to really go out of your way
to find things that aren't slanted in that one direction. But this article really talked about how Trump was delusional because Trump had this image of America from the 1960s, and so Trump is trying to create a society where
we built things and had good middle
where Americans are buying
jobs.
Products that are made in America and that support American job, and how quaint and silly of him, right? This was sort of the gist of the article. But
you know who else believed that up until like 48 hours ago or a week ago?
Bernie Sanders,
Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi. I mean, although she's hardly recognizable in some of those clips. But
yes, the one from the 90s where she talks about trade with China as a jobs loser.
Yes.
Jobs loser,
yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And now she's like...
And the tariff and the trade imbalance. She was talking about that too.
Right.
So, but anyway, it's one of my favorite sayings. If they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any. It's almost impossible to talk about it without pointing to the double standards.
Yeah. And I watched this clip from Fareed Zakaria on CNN, and we'll drop the link, Mr. Producer, on the show. And he's basically extrapolating very, what's the word I'm looking for? Dishonest use of data, right?
What's that old saying? Figures don't lie, but liars figure, or something like that?
Yeah, you're talking about...
right? It's a famous saying. I don't know who said it. But the point of that is, that
96% of all statistics are made up.
Right. the point of that is just, you can manipulate data. So,
and I'm watching, I'm watching this clip with Zakaria, and he's comparing sort of U.S. GDP growth to Japan. And everybody, and if you study economics at all, Japan's been in a 2-decade, literally depression, and their population is plummeting. They don't have any growth. South Korea I read somewhere that South Korea was now offering young couples $14,000 to have a baby.
Yeah, there's a few places.
It wasn't having any impact.
Eastern Europe, I think, did a lot of that in recent decades.
Yeah, but anyway, back to the whole tariff point. This idea, and so you kind of put aside the idea that this is a negotiation tactic. And now, granted, not like there's no televisions made in America. So if you want to buy a TV and tariffs get imposed, absolutely you'll pay a higher price, right? There's a lot of things that aren't made here that you will pay a higher price for. Right. But for a lot of things that are made here, all it does is equalize, right? There's a 7,000% tariff on American rice in Japan. Nobody talks about, well, no, actually they do talk about Japan's economy, but there's this idea that why is Japan protecting Japanese rice, right?
Right.
Why is Australia? By the way, the only kind of lamb I can get at Costco is Australian lamb.
Yeah.
I found out from Howard Lutnick's interview recently that American beef is not even allowed forget tariffs, they don't even allow it in Australia.
Right.
Right? And large sections of Europe, American beef is not allowed. So it's super...
Dairy products, everything we're good at, pretty much. A lot of agriculture and dairy and food products. Cars, energy.
Yeah, that's a big one. Yeah. And they don't even allow it in their country. So you can't even. So this was an interesting interview with Howard Lutnick and Brett Baer from Fox News. And Brett Baer says, "Why do you have?" And this is how I learned about the beef thing. He's like, "Why do you have tariffs on Australia? You have a trade surplus." And Howard Lutnick says it's not just about tariffs. They don't even allow our beef in their country, right? And I go to, again, I love lamb, and I go to Costco. I can't even. There's no American lamb there. It's all Australian, which is interesting. And
it's trade in general, not just tariffs. And they also brought up the point, which was a really good point, which I didn't think a lot about until now. That it's also the currency manipulation and a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah.
In years past, they would go around. Even when tariffs or things were imposed, they would just sell their products through another country.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, right? It's complicated.
The Chinese are famous for their currency manipulation.
Yeah. Oh, and never mind, they're violating, copyright laws and all that kind of other stuff.
They single-handedly destroyed the solar panel industry in America because they so heavily subsidized solar panels in China. They started dumping in the U.S.
Yeah.
And you go to the WTO or you go to the what's the other trade organization, GATT, and you go to GATT and you complain about it, and of course there's no enforcement.
It just occurred to me. What else that 90-10 that Trump's got the left fighting for now is the good old days of 2 weeks ago. They're all for it now, Sonny.
Yeah,
I don't want to go back to the good old days, of having all our American products, the things we're good at, prohibited from selling. Anyway.
By the way, the most American car based on like parts and where the parts come from and all of that is the Tesla Model Y.
Yeah.
Yeah. That also happens to be the car I drive. Now, nobody set it on fire because I'll be very mad if somebody comes after my car. And I love my car. And it's the most American car there is. And so this idea that we can't bring manufacturing back to the U.S. is silly. It's silly, right?
Yeah, the point of this, too, is others will bring the manufacturing here.
Yeah.
Right? That's the whole point of this, is that you're going to have foreign companies invest in producing on American soil, which,
Kentucky, I believe Kentucky has a huge Toyota plant. BMW is in South Carolina. I know Nissan is in Mississippi. Boeing is opening something in somewhere in the Midwest as well. So there's.
And I'm going to push back a little bit on your point about TVs. That may be true today, but I don't know why a year or 2 years from now, if the tariffs are not worked out, which again, I'm a believer that probably very few of these are going to last long.
Yeah.
I think.
So you think it's mostly negotiations?
Sure. Because the end game is just to have true
free trade.
Free trade.
Yep.
And if you want free trade, you got to get rid of these, because we've been talking a good game for a number of decades, but we're not there. To your point of, in some places they just outright don't allow our products to be sold. In some cases, when they do make concessions of being sold, they tax it.
Yep.
That's going to end under this president. I have no doubt about it.
So you could argue the point, this is your point, that globalization and free trade only works if it's truly free trade, right? So if you have...
That was a hard lesson for me to learn, and probably one that's relatively recent in my life. I always thought I was a free market and a capitalist kind of guy, but the truth is so much isn't free. And if it's crony capitalism, which I loved whoever it was that coined that phrase, that's not real capitalism. You could be as socialist or almost communist as your planned economy wants to be with crony capitalism. What's the difference? So we got to get away from that too. And that was a hard lesson for me.
Well, that's what
it's not. It's not like one size fits all when you say you're for free markets and capitalism.
Right.
So, and by the way, there's always a connection on our show, I feel like, to ABC and our values.
Absolutely.
Of free markets and the merit shop. This doesn't mean, again, the kind of regulations we like are okay and the ones you like aren't okay. No, it should mean, as open and free and fair as possible. And that's where our president's trying to take us on a global scale.
And then the other point I would make is, if you aren't college educated and you feel like life is passing you by and you're interested in a career in construction, call us. ABC Institute. We are the largest provider of apprenticeship education in the state of Florida. We can help you get jobs. We have 610 members of this organization who are always looking for good help. So if you're interested, we are here, and we would love to help you start a career in construction.
Absolutely. So
that's also a connection that I wanted to, because you think about that, and you and I obviously are big believers that not everybody needs to go to college. College is not the answer for every single human being, and then there's other options out there. And with the death of manufacturing, I think what construction offers is even more valuable because it can be outsourced.
Right, exactly. We talk about that a lot with policymakers, that the one unique thing about the blue collar trades and how they're different jobs than the others is they are subject to being outsourced. They are subject to tariffs. They are subject to countries saying we're not going to allow your products in here. But construction, that can't happen. As long as this country's growing and people want to build new buildings, and maintain the buildings that they have, there's going to be work for people in the construction trades.
I remember a press conference from Obama, and he was at some community college talking about, and it was in the Midwest, and he was talking about how, we understand your town's been hollowed out, but now we're going to help you retrain into computer coding, And it's something I remember Biden said when he shut the pipeline down when he took over office, right? There's other skills, retrain, reskill. Yeah. And it's like, now you're... Coding is being outsourced. It's going to, Poland and Ukraine, and, now they're saying AI will just code for you. You don't even need to do coding, right?
One of the things that really just turns my stomach is it's platitudes and the lazy thinking, which 9 times out of 10, if you go out there and ask people to comment about the tariffs, it's going to be, this has the potential to really cost us, Nobody, we did, I think, a previous show a little bit on this, it touched on it. Nobody's talking about, if this works, all right, think about the factories that are going to have to be built. Think about how that's going to benefit our industry.
Absolutely.
In terms of new construction.
Absolutely.
There's going to be a lot of people moving here to try to, again, avoid the tariffs if they're actually even going to exist, or either lower the tariffs, in which case you're still going to have production happening because people are now, I believe in the American worker more than anybody, I think, in the ingenuity and
And one more point to that I'm going to add, and we've all forgotten this. Remember how instead of outsourcing, they were talking about onshoring, bringing manufacturing back, especially during COVID?
Yeah.
How much that conversation really took off?
Because we couldn't get the antibiotics or the masks or
PPEs and
And they were like, what a great position to be in.
Yeah, this is insane. We got to bring it back. So now we have an opportunity to bring back medicine and not being, I just took some antibiotics a month ago. They were Chinese. It literally said that, right? And I'm like, wow, what happens if there's another COVID or China's like, forget it, we're not giving you our meds, There's a lot of critical infrastructure that needs to be in this country.
Right.
Period.
Right.
And so again, something else that's good for our industry.
In my whole life, I was told, I've mentioned this many times, I think, in the podcast, from people when you make arguments that, the truth is not a hill of beans worth the difference. Republican presidents and Democrat presidents, Republican Congresses and Democrat Congresses have all come and gone, and they've never changed in reality. They talk a different game. And, it was a hard lesson, but they weren't necessarily wrong for me to learn. But, you got somebody now who's willing to actually restructure the global markets to change the direction, right, of production and those kind of things in this country. So, and you got people screaming that, again, a decade or two ago at most would have supported this concept. So,
I mean, it's interesting. I know we're running out of time, so we're going to wrap up quickly. But I remember clearly Bill Clinton and who was the Speaker of the House back then?
Bill Clinton, Newt Gingrich. Mm-hmm.
Celebrating NAFTA, right? And what a game changer it was. Mm-hmm. And now I hear Newt Gingrich on TV, and he's like, "Yep, terrible mistake. Should have never happened."
Right.
But
I mean, the idea was good, but I guess it wasn't negotiated or either followed. I've heard a big part of the problem with a lot of past trade arrangements was they just weren't enforced, or they would slip into, policies of charging tariffs and different things, and we just never pushed back. Right.
All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed this conversation on tariffs. It's a complicated issue. We're not trying to cover it A to Z. There's a lot of contributing factors and layers and elements to this. But thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed this little foray into what's been in the news, just to give you some context and some history and how important this issue is. So, we hope you'll get out there and do your own research.
It's going to change the life for Americans for the better.
Absolutely.
I'm absolutely confident of that. So, yep.
Thank you for listening and honoring us with your time.
Right.
We look forward to sharing another episode with you soon.
All right. For comments, please send us an email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Until next time. Ciao.